Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Lexham author interview. My name is Scott Corbin, and I serve on the marketing team at Lexham Press. Today, we're going to do things a little differently from our other interviews. So our focus today is going to be on the new book from Lexham Press, Learning Biblical Hebrew. But instead of just an author interview, we'll be having a panel of the author and two other guests who have actually incorporated this text into their classroom. So my guest today will be Rebekah Josberger, professor of Hebrew and Old Testament at Multnomah University, and the co-author with Carl Cutts of Learning Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension, and Introductory Grammar, which we affectionately like to call LBH. In addition, she'll be joined by Andrew King, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, as well as Adam Howell, Assistant Professor of Old Testament Interpretation at Boyce College. Everybody, thanks so much for joining me. So the first question I want to ask is for Becky. So I would love to know just kind of the story about why you and your co-author, Carl Cutts, decided to write this grammar.
There are so many stories I could tell, and most of them would involve throwing him under the bus because that's what I love to do. But let me try and keep it rather concise. Both of us have similar journeys with Hebrew. I'll just share mine. I took Hebrew 1 a number of times and from really great professors. I worked when I was a TA, I worked on, contributing to certain grammars and helping edit things and fill in glossary lists. And I had a lot of Hebrew background, but I didn't feel very confident in my Hebrew. I knew there were things I did not understand. Then I went on and I ended up retaking Hebrew because I knew there were holes in my understanding. I could get great grades on quizzes, but then I'd go read the text and I'd feel like I couldn't parse things with confidence, and I'd be looking them up, and there was always an exception to every rule. And when I retook Hebrew, I had a chance to fill in all those gaps and really it was explained to me, like, here's how Hebrew works and why, and here's how the vowels work and all of this, but we didn't, in that context, practice reading it at all and translating, decoding, whatever you want to call it. And I wanted desperately to teach Hebrew, but I did not want to teach it if it meant that I would be the teacher of the most difficult yet least used course on a seminary campus. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Hebrew is the most difficult, but it kind of gets that rap. But you can work really hard at it and then never use it again. And that, to me, wasn't going to be worth my time. So actually, when I got hired at Multnomah, my only downside was that I looked on the website and there was this picture of this Hebrew teacher. And I was like, shoot, I'm going to some place where they already have a Hebrew teacher and he already knows what he's doing. He's going to try and make me do it his way. I am not a good team player. I am not interested. So it turns out he was probably the greatest gift that this campus had for me. But besides just trying to merge our programs, what I found was that his students not only loved Hebrew, they used it years later. And while I was trying to find a way to merge the two types of pedagogy I had been sitting under, like reading it, getting in the text as quickly as you could, falling in love with it, and understanding it, he seemed to have already figured out how to do just that. And after about a year of working together and a year of asking every student who came back on campus, whether they'd been gone for 10 or 15 years or 3 years, do you still read your Hebrew? And having them say, oh yeah, I was like, that's what I want to do. So I learned a lot in the process. A lot of gaps were filled in. I challenged some things that he said that I thought were nonsense, and sometimes I was right. We had a great time with it. But one of the main things we did was just find ways to get students into the text faster and faster and faster so that they could feel free to make mistakes when they knew very little, because they just didn't know how to read that part yet, and it was okay. And then later when they found anomalies, well, they were used to that. So that was probably one of our biggest achievements during that time of working together.
That's great. And so I would love to know, just briefly for those who might not know about the grammar, things like that, what are kind of some of the kind of things that distinguish this grammar? What are maybe some unique kind of pedagogical aspects of it? Something that distinguishes it from other types of grammars, because there's all sorts of grammars out there for people to choose from.
Yeah, the last thing that was needed is another grammar. I know that. The last thing. But there are two main features, I think, that distinguish it in written form. I think there's another feature that distinguishes the way we use it in the classroom that we try to communicate to professors and instructors, either personally or on the webpage. The first one is that we take advanced concepts that are usually learned post-PhD kind of things and introduce them right up front. How the language develops, how it works together, what changes, what's the personality of the language, the changes you can come to expect, even if you can't predict them 100% of the time. And while they're really advanced concepts, if you can, they're rather simple, and they're not going to be super helpful in those first weeks, but if they're just woven in all the way through the chapters, that saves a ton of memorization in the end, a ton. And you're understanding the personality of the language rather than trying to recall it years later when maybe you haven't looked at it in a while. The second feature I think that's really distinctive is we made a graded reader. We took the Joseph narrative, and by week 2 or 3, you're right there in the text reading about a chapter a week. Depends, you don't have to finish the whole chapter, depends on your reading level, but that's a different issue. And you're reading something with continuous flow. It's edited, so it only includes the grammar elements that you've learned, but it's glossed, so we can include more things in the text. And there's just a delight in getting to read a continuous narrative all the way through first semester. Students are also able to see their progress about, what I'd say, like 8 weeks in, when suddenly they're looking at the text and we're saying, no, this is straight biblical Hebrew now. Like, we're not in a glossed reader anymore. Look at this. This is, compare it to your Bible. And then they're, look, we're reading. So that's really encouraging. The piece that I don't know if it will come across in a grammar is the idea that it's okay to fail at something while you're learning, especially a language, and that freedom to embrace Hebrew as if it's alive, as if it's a personality that you can get to know. You can kind of love it, you can kind of hate it sometimes too, and that's okay. And you can make mistakes. For example, when we make assignments, we have a 4-hour undergraduate Hebrew class, 3-hour seminary. They do 5 hours of translation a week, and that's it. And we don't care how far they get as long as they're always getting a little bit further. It just kind of, it's not as much a performance based. And when they're performing, then they're encouraged because they got something. But if they're struggling, that's part of language learning. So that and the communal element are two pieces that kind of go jointly with this approach.
That's great. And so Andrew and Adam, you guys have actually incorporated this grammar into your classrooms. And so I would love to know, when you transferred to LBH, what made you decide to go with this grammar as opposed to others? Maybe what you were using before versus after. I would just kind of love to know each of your individual stories. I don't care which one of you goes first, so you guys can pick.
So I was using a grammar that the best way I can describe it is heavy on morphology. And so some of the stuff that Becky was talking about as far as learning the personality of the language, the way I like to describe it or mention the method I was using was you're learning the I before E except after C, or it sounded like A as a neighbor. Like, that's good stuff to know. But you can read without necessarily knowing that. And you can communicate without necessarily knowing that. And so that methodology that I was using, I love. I still love it. I think it's important. But what drew me to learning biblical Hebrew was that there was enough of that students can know what they need to know and what they're doing in the Hebrew text, but they reinforced it in the Hebrew text. I kept telling my students in the former method that I would use, I started incorporating readings into the second semester. And I kept telling them, this is where the magic happens. When you can get into the Hebrew Bible and see all these things that we've been talking about, that the students are asking me, now tell me again, why am I doing this? It's like, because it's right here in Deuteronomy. That's why we're doing this. And for me, it was second semester before we were even doing that. And I was having to incorporate that in myself, which just made everything super tight. So what drew me to this grammar was that all of that's there. It's all right there. You get enough of the morphology, enough of the personality of the language to know how to translate it. And then all of that gets reinforced in the Hebrew text, which is where the magic happens. And so I've used the grammar for a year now. My students have absolutely loved it. And I don't, the one thing that keeps coming to my mind too is, and I think Becky was kind of getting at this, is the part that I'm not sure if it will come through, but you don't often get to know the authors of a grammar. A lot of times you just kind of pick it up and begin using it based on the value of the grammar itself. But getting to know Carl and Becky a little bit, I can tell you that heart for seeing students love the Hebrew Bible, it does come through in this grammar. And that was another thing that drew me to it. And so, so I've used it for a year now. Love it.
I was going into my first year of full-time teaching and was scrambling, like many of us do when you're beginning a new post. So, knowing that I was heading into my first year and that Hebrew was on the docket, I was just scrambling and racking my brain for how I wanted students to engage the language and just my personality. I like Becky, I wanted students to love the language and not to hate me or hate the institution because they have to take it, but to actually enjoy the process, to work hard, but to enjoy the process. So I think I was online somewhere and I was just scrolling. Maybe it was a Facebook ad or something like that. And I almost scrolled past it. I remember this vividly. I almost scrolled past it, and I saw the cover, and I read the title, "Learning Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension," and I thought, and I wasn't sure if it was one of those like, some guy wrote this in his basement and is trying to sell it to me now on Facebook. So I clicked on it and I saw the table of contents and read a little bit about the methodology and the heart behind it. And I thought, this is what I'm looking for. Like Adam, I had learned on a method that was very heavy on the morphology. In fact, I mean, my story is a little more tragic, where after 2 semesters of working my way, grueling through Hebrew, I couldn't read anything. So I was finishing my second semester and couldn't read anything. I could parse everything. I knew a lot of vocabulary. So one of my deal breakers was that students would be reading as soon as possible. And I'm a big fan of a system that's integrated. As professors, we're always doing things and supplementing and all of this, but I wanted a system that had a very integrated approach to the language. And when I saw the grammar, I was very excited about the way that it flowed. But then when I saw the workbook, I about fell out of my chair because it was exactly what I was looking for. And I mean, I was sitting by my mailbox just waiting for this thing to come in the mail when they said they were sending it to me. And when I looked at it, I just saw it was exactly what I was looking for. The chapters are descriptive enough where if a student doesn't take a note or something on something that I said in class, they can go back to the grammar, and there is a very user-friendly, student-oriented explanation of the concepts that they're working through. But then also it does get them in the text really early, and I found that particularly helpful with the verbal system. So when we got to verbs and introducing verbs in chapter 11. I'm talking about what a perfect is, and they're like, oh yeah, we've been seeing that all along, like no problem. And it was just a really easy kind of transition. So I really enjoyed using it, and my students have benefited greatly from it as well.
That's great. There's a couple of things about those comments that are endearing. One is the value of Facebook ads. So thank you very much. That's for someone who does marketing, it's like, all right, good to know that. That's good there. The other thing too that I'm hearing from each of you is the importance of reading. And one of the things I was thinking about just in terms of, teaching anything. So my son is 4 years old and we're teaching him how to read. And so we're working through books and things like that. And it's interesting how even as we're teaching him how to just read English, how the hope is that he would just love letters and words and trying and seeing sounding out his first words and understanding what it says and the kind of encouragement that is, as opposed to maybe just feeling like, oh well, I can't, a lot of times he'll say, will you read this book to me? And I say, well, oh, just go look at it yourself. And he says, well, I don't know how to read, but then whenever we sit down and actually walk through, what letter is this, what sound does it make, what is what is this word, what do you think that it says whenever you sound it out, and just that encouragement and that delight in his face. It sounds like that's the sort of thing that you guys are trying to communicate with this.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I had the same morphological intensive training that these guys had. And so I did understand those things, but Dr. Kutz understood them much better and had spent a lot longer studying them and trying to put them in a format that students could understand and apply them. So really, when I talk about the grammar, that part, even though I understand it and brought some of it with me, that's his magic he's been working on for years and years. But one of the things that I was able to contribute, and I don't say this to aggrandize me, it's just that, I had something to contribute. But one of those things was having both homeschooled my children in a classical approach to education, and I spent a year as an exchange student overseas in Germany. And I went there knowing one German word, Kugelschreiber, which no one uses. It means ballpoint pen, and they call it a Kuli. And that's it. And so then I had to learn the language. And what we're constantly bringing in when we come back, or when we were writing the grammar, or when we're like putting our courses together, is the fact that, one, you have to have the freedom to sound things out really slowly. Like, I can't read. They need to have the freedom to, no, you can't. Good. I'm glad you recognize that, but let me show you how to, and it can go slowly. The other thing is that every human brain, I learned this when we were homeschooling our children, processes learning to read at different speeds, and it has nothing to do with intelligence. Often in a language class, the one who starts processing it the fastest gets targeted sort of as the brightest, and they're the ones that succeed. And there isn't really an honest correlation between those two. It's a more socially impressed correlation. And my favorite challenge isn't when someone says, like, I haven't used Hebrew in a while, but I used to know it. Could you teach me? Sure, I can refresh you. This book is designed for that. But it's I'm not a language learner. I failed out of language in high school. I can't learn Hebrew. Otherwise, I would try. Oh, that student's going to be in my class in the fall, and they're going to love it. I'll stop. But so it's that piece. The other piece is that you sometimes hit plateaus when you're learning, and they all happen at different places. And if there isn't a system built into the way you're teaching that allows for some lag time some weeks, and you just encourage them through it. You're not going to get 100 on every quiz. And if you do get 100 on every quiz, yay for you, but there's going to be things you encounter in the text that you don't feel super confident with. And if our class, I promise, will make you feel comfortable with that before you get there on your own. So it's those kind of, like I said, the homeschooling, the language acquisition, just the human side of processing language learning.
That's really encouraging. And it also reminds me that whenever I was doing my MDiv in one of my language courses, there was a student who, when we were talking about the class, had said that we were talking about how it was going, and it was very stressful, and we're all in like a crash course, and we're just trying to like hold on for dear life. And she was saying how whenever she heard the professor's voice, it actually like gave her anxiety, which I think is kind of a pretty funny story. And I actually think like,
been there, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a real thing that like, students go through whenever they're learning a language. And I think that it's a funny story, but I do think that it does get to the fact that, especially for students when they're learning this language, it feels so far out of their comfort zone if they've never learned a language before. And especially learning a language, it's not a spoken language, it's a language for reading, things like that. So with that, in terms of the topic of students, I would love to know if you guys have them, of any maybe success stories that really come to your mind when you think about students using the grammar and feeling just really encouraged or getting it in a way that maybe they didn't, that was really encouraging. So
I have one I'll say real quick because that's where I was going to go before, and I'm so proud of her. We have a number of these. My favorite are the ones that are really struggling, and then they grab it. But we have a student who was excused from all languages in high school because she had learning disabilities and couldn't learn them. I believe she failed her first semester, possibly even her second, or just barely eked by, but we could see incredible momentum. And she had come to us and we knew how hard she was working, and we trust the program, it works. She quickly went on to become one of our top students, and she'll be heading on to St. Andrews this fall for a PhD program. It's so fun to see her interact with our Hebrew students too, because it used to be she was the one that kind of lagged along and everyone was tutoring her. And then all of those have graduated and all of these newbies are here and they just idolize her. And she's the Hebrew goddess on campus. And it's so fun knowing the journey behind that even in second year, there was some struggling and, and it's fun too, because we can reassure them it's a skill-based language. So if you are looking to go on for further studies, who cares if you get an F or a D or a C? Who cares? Because you show up in their office and you read to them. And you're like, I learned the skill. So we have a bunch of those, but I get really proud of those. So.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to say earlier, particularly for students that are self-teaching, or students who just by their own learning style just need to kind of work through it on their own, and then they show up to class and they're like, yeah, what you're saying is reaffirming what I've been doing. The way that the grammar is written, I found to just be very helpful. It's very student friendly, where a lot of grammars use a lot of jargon and it sounds scary, and students, I have my students, they all have that pocket dictionary of biblical Hebrew or whatever it's called. They all have that just for, when words come up they don't know, they can look it up. And sometimes the definitions in there are very confusing as well. But as they're reading through the grammar, the vocabulary and just the prose that's in there, I found to be very refreshing. I mean, even as I was going through it, just prepping for the class, just hearing phrases like, okay, we're going to throw a lot at you. You don't need all of it. We're going to come back to it. And I mean, you just don't get that in other grammars. The way that I learned, it was everything in this chapter is of the utmost importance and your life will end if you don't memorize it all, and that just was intimidating and not very life-giving. So just hearing realism come through in the grammar was just really freeing for my students. One of the most, just as far as stories go, one of my students who was struggling hard in first semester. I mean, it was like every week, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I'm going to quit school. I don't know if I'm a Christian. I mean, it's like the progression goes really quick when you're learning Hebrew. So this student was there, and at the end of the semester, so this is a student never seen Hebrew characters in their life. Through working through one semester of the grammar, I had them do one of the assignments that Carl and Becky has, where they memorized Genesis 1, a little bit of Genesis 1, and this student. I'll never forget. He came into my office and he's like trembling, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be bad. Like I love believes all things, but I'm just thinking this is going to go bad. And this guy opened his mouth. I opened my Hebrew Bible and he spit out like 5 verses of Hebrew from the Bible. And I'm sitting there blown away that just happened. He was probably freaked out because my jaw was on my table, and we paused and we just praised God together. That just through the process, I mean, he's in it, so he can't see. But at the end of the semester, someone who couldn't, pronounce the name of God, at the beginning of the semester, spit out 5 verses at the end, just through faithfully working through the process. That gives me encouragement, and that's just one of the many stories that I could share how this grammar has been beneficial for my experience.
Scott, if I can, I'll throw in one quick story that's more general, thinking of the class as a whole. Throughout previous years of teaching Hebrew, you find that one or two students who they just latch on to something because it's a language. They're like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to conquer it. I love it. And you kind of have hope that they will continue reading their Hebrew Bibles. But what I found this year using this grammar and having them read so quickly, is having them read so quickly and to read so much Hebrew, is I have probably half of the class that will raise their hands and say, yes, I would love to be part of a summer reading group that we can meet over Zoom and read more Hebrew. I had 3 students this year who audited the class because they just wanted to learn Hebrew. And students that are continuing to read Hebrew into the summer in a variety of fashions. And that again is the goal. Like, that's why would I don't want them to work hard, and I don't want to invest all of this time in something that is going to just end up ending after 2 semesters. And it doesn't need to end after 2 semesters. It shouldn't end after 2 semesters. And so to have a methodology that not only did I kind of foresee that coming, that students would want to stay in their Hebrew Bibles, but that they actually are, that to me is a success story for the whole class as well. So
I have one more story. I know we're running short on time, but this is my favorite part, is when the students are in love with it. Is it okay?
Sorry. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Real quick. I was asked to teach at a different seminary just to fill in. They didn't have a Hebrew professor, and I love Hebrew so much that I was like, sure, if no one else is going to do it, you got to learn Hebrew. And the reason it was significant that it was a different seminary was the love of Hebrew is already sort of inbred in our seminary's DNA, but it wasn't over there. And for the first probably 5 weeks of class, we only met once a week, I spent almost 30 minutes answering the question, why does this matter? Or being confronted with that question, what is this going to do for my life? I did the best I could, but that's just the setting. And at one point I brought in a bunch of the different Hebrew Bibles you could get, the Reader's Bible, all these different options. I said, the only reason I'm doing this is because Christmas is coming up. You don't need one for this class. All the text you need is in the workbook, but some of you will be requesting Hebrew Bibles. It happens every year. And one of the students, he did not mean to be rude. There was nothing averse in his personality whatsoever, but he just sneered. I mean, it was blatant. You mean to tell me that I'm going to put a Bible, a Hebrew Bible, I love Bibles, but something I can't even read on my Christmas list? Ain't never going to happen. And so it was fine. This class was a little taken aback. He had to kind of smooth it over and keep going because I knew he didn't mean it to be rude. Well, second semester comes around that first week, and he comes into class and he's like, I hate to interrupt, but I got to show you what I got for Christmas. I swear he has no recollection of saying that. But the whole class was in an uproar, and he was so excited. He just wanted to show the class his Bible. So we ended up getting a picture and making a big deal of it, but he just couldn't wait. And he honestly did not remember the level of scorn he had at the beginning. And now it was an interlinear. He's like, this way I'll be able to read it forever. I mean, it was just so exciting to see that genuine perspective shift, even in value.
That's great. Guys, this was very encouraging, especially for me, who is admittedly a lapsed Hebrew student. And so I feel like having, sat down with you guys and hearing these stories, I'm like, I'm gonna relearn Biblical Hebrew. I'm gonna take LBH and I'm going to relearn Biblical Hebrew. So again, everyone, Becky, Andrew, Adam, thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, the book is Learning Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension and Introductory Guide. So guys, thanks so much.